Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Ekalona, and this is Nashville. More and more of our city's churches are acknowledging and accepting LGBTQ congregates. According to the website gaychurches.org, the number of LGBTQ-affirming congregations in Nashville has grown by more than 50% over the last decade or so. This follows a national trend towards acceptance. Old beliefs about who is allowed to worship and lead are changing. And as a result, so is the idea of what church can be. So what does this mean for LGBTQ believers who have felt excluded or even harmed by religion in the past? That's coming up later this hour. But first, it's time for At Us. Each week, we take time to read the comments so you don't have to. Yes, I am encouraging you to literally at us on Twitter at This Is Nashville and on Instagram at This Is Nashville_WPLN. Joining me now, as always, with a look back at the past week is our digital lead, Anna Gallegos-Cannon. Hey, Anna.
Hey, Khalil.
How's it going?
It's always good to be in the studio.
Yes, it is. That's why I love Thursdays. Okay, so let's get right to it. During yesterday's episode about WeGo, we received a number of comments from listeners about the changes they'd like to see in our local bus system. So many that we couldn't fit them all into the show.
Yeah, and I hope someone from WeGo is listening and taking notes right now.
Yeah.
So we got several comments from listeners asking for extended bus service, in the evenings especially. Also, a few people pointed out that other cities around the world are designed around buses and trains. But here, they point out it feels like the opposite. So our listener, Tony, wrote on Twitter that he'd like to see WeGo's train service run 7 days a week. Someone who goes by Izaurus wrote in to say, quote, I need Sunday service on crosstown buses to Wedgwood, Houston, and 100 Oaks. And Phil also tweeted at us to say, I would love for MTA to make one more evening run after 6 p.m. from Murfreesboro/MTSU to Nashville. I'd be on it. I am way over my auto commute. There's so many reckless and inconsiderate drivers on I-24. And you know what, Phil? I 100% agree with you because I'm very much over my commute.
I feel you. We need a little bit more Nashville nice on these roads out here.
And you know what? We had a really great episode about Nashville nice last week.
That's right. In case you missed it, it's a must listen. It was all about the quirks and mannerisms that make Nashville spin on Southern hospitality, uniquely Nashville.
So speaking about Nashville nice, Sasha Rose 36 shared on our Instagram account at thisisnashville_WPLN, quote, the people are what make this city great. I like the friendliness and the openness to speak to each other in public. It makes a big city feel small. I don't really believe in being indirect. There is nothing wrong with saying no as long as you do it in a kind way.
There you go. I got to practice my kind no's out here. All right, Anna, what else we got?
So we had a show about paganism on Tuesday. I totally didn't know until we started booking the show that some consider Nashville the buckle of the pagan belt.
Me either. I didn't know that either.
Yeah, that was the first time I ever heard it. But we got some feedback from our listener, Phil, whom I mentioned earlier, on Twitter. He said, quote, the show seemed to me to imply that self-avowed Wiccans and pagans are the predominant alternatives to mainstream Christianity. In fact, there are more humanist, naturalist, and secularist, of other sorts who do not dabble in magic or hexes or other supernatural-sounding sorts of talk. I do really want to clarify something here, that Wiccans and pagans are only a fraction of non-Christians in Tennessee. According to Pew, 1% of Tennesseans identify as pagans. Meanwhile, 14% of Tennesseans are nuns, and that is N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S.
Okay.
Meaning this 14% doesn't, follow any faith. But I will add that these numbers are from 2014. But recently, other studies from Pew have actually shown that Americans who identify as nuns on the rise.
Yeah, either way, I think it's good fodder for doing another show on this in the near future. There was so much complexity really to unpack in this. Thank you for the feedback, Phil. I appreciate it. All right, so do we have any other interesting comments?
Well, during Monday's show about the local film scene, I asked on Twitter Could Nashville become the Hollywood of the South?
Oh, wow.
And I think we got the best answer from our guest and local film producer, Max Butler, who wrote that the answer to this question is no. But that's all right. We're good because there's plenty of stories to tell.
There are a lot of stories. I'm sure Atlanta would fight hard for that title. I'd like to see that battle, though. After that episode, a listener pointed out that there was one film festival we forgot to mention, but we can make up for that, right, Anna?
Absolutely. So Lóre Stevens reached out to us to let us know about the Nashville Jewish Film Festival, which begins next Wednesday on October 12th. Mm-hmm. Loretta is actually one of the festival's co-directors. And you know what? This festival's going on for a long time. It has been going on for 22 years.
Wow.
So the Nashville Jewish Film Festival is hosting some of its screenings at the Belcourt and the AMC location in Bellevue. So if you're a movie buff or you're interested in learning about Jewish culture, you know what? You really might want to check this out.
That's right. Awesome. Awesome. Thanks to our digital lead, Anna Gallegos-Cannon, for this roundup. Anna, we'll see you soon.
Of course, and our listeners know where to find me online.
Don't forget to add us on Twitter and Instagram. Let's keep the comments coming. Also, fill out our community survey to let us know what topics you want us to cover at thisisnashville.org. It's super easy and quick and really helps us produce the shows with your needs and interests in mind. We have to take a short break. When we come back, we'll meet some local church leaders who are finding ways to welcome and center our LGBTQ community. Do you attend an LGBTQ-affirming church? Are you looking for one? Tweet us at This Is Nashville. We'll be right back.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Ekalona, and this is Nashville. Welcoming spaces are vital to life of any community. That's especially true for our LGBTQ community, which historically hasn't always been centered or welcomed. Now, there's one spot in town that they've been welcoming this community for decades. In fact, it's celebrating 20 years this weekend, the Lipstick Lounge in East Nashville. Here's how drag queen Kennedy Ann Scott described the bar and karaoke joint.
We are a bar for humans. We love everybody. We take anybody in. This is church for some people.
But for some people, church is church. And that's why we're here to talk about today. That's what we're here to talk about today. Churches provide not only a spiritual connection, but community connection. But for many people of faith, those connections have been closed off simply because of their sexuality and gender identity. But the church community in town is changing. It's trending towards acceptance and affirmation of LGBTQ members. And more on that, it's trending towards centering LGBTQ experiences in ministry and leadership. My next guest understands what that's all about. Stephen Ader is a worship leader at Glendale United Methodist Church. Stephen, thank you for being here. Welcome to This Is Nashville.
Glad to be here.
So, let's go back to the Glendale United Methodist Church in 2017. Yep. I understand that it was in a pretty bad state. What was happening there at the time?
Yeah, I grew up at Glendale, and my grandparents made up the bulk of that congregation as I grew up as a child. And we were just doing the church like we always had done it. It was a welcoming, loving place. I had all the grandmothers in the world growing up. But we weren't doing something along the way to reach out to new generations and to open the door wide. And in 2017, we got down to probably around 25 in worship attendance. And I looked around and said, this is not sustainable or vital or going to last very much longer. So we made some intentional steps to make changes. Mostly pretty small changes, but we all hit it all at once. But I think the most important change that we made was to be intentional in our inclusion and racial justice efforts to really reach out and make sure that our doors were actually widely available to all.
What were those discussions like as you all were becoming more intentional about inclusion to different communities?
Yeah, luckily at that point, I would say the old guard had moved on, so it was kind of a blank canvas. So we had a few new people coming, so there was some of that new energy that was already happening around 2017. So our pastor, she is amazing, and she let the door again be open internally for us to really move forward and do whatever we needed to do to reach out. It was it happened naturally. Like everything just fell together. I couldn't ask for an easier thing. We really started to push inclusion, racial justice, whatnot. But we, churches have to vote on these things to be a reconciling congregation, to say they're going to be inclusive. At least in the United Methodist Church, we have to do that. And it was a unanimous vote. When we got to it. So most churches have to have long, drawn-out discussions, conversations, disagreements, whatnot. We voted, and it was unanimous. So that just, we were at the place where that was the right time. We did that in 2019, so it was a couple years, but from that day in 2017, we started seeing growth, and the people that came were finding us because we were a place where they could heal and reconnect with the church and reconnect with a relationship with God that they had been excluded from in other churches.
Now, I understand the two questions really quick. You said that you guys went down to 25 membership. Where are you at now?
So we've added 80 members in the last few years.
Okay.
And I would say that we have probably about 150 active people. And many who have not officially joined, of course. Joining the church doesn't happen as regularly as it used to. But there's only probably about 7 or 8 of us that have been around longer than 5 years. Okay. So it's a whole new group of people. And it's been a transformation where people have found hope and healing in the church again.
Now, I understand there's a saying you picked up that was a big part of this pivot.
Yeah. So on that Sunday, in 2017, I think it was August 17th, 2017, when we made all the changes. We added a welcome message that me and my partner at the time had heard at Capitol Hill United Methodist Church in Washington, D.C. when we went to a kickball tournament. And we brought it back because we thought it was so important, and just the intentional words, sharing as an act of worship, not just writing it on your website, not just, printing it in your bulletin, but actually saying it. We say it in every worship service, and it's no matter who you are, where you have come from, or where you are going, no matter what you have or what you don't have, no matter what you believe or what you may be doubting, and no matter the color of your skin, who you love, or how you identify, you are welcomed into this community of faith by a God who loves all of who you are and knows you by name. And we've had people come back because we share those words in worship. And I think our churches even our inclusive churches, don't take words that might seem simple on face value, but they mean so much to people who have never heard that in their life be spoken out aloud as an act of worship in a service.
Now we've been using this term LGBTQ-affirming, but you just used the term reconciling congregation.
Yep.
Tell me, what does it mean to be a reconciling congregation?
Yeah, so each denomination has their own kind of term of being intentionally inclusive. In the United Methodist Church, that would be reconciling. So for a church to vote to become a reconciling congregation means that you are making an intentional stand, an act to profess and proudly profess and loudly share that you are not just a welcoming church like most churches like to say they are, but you are actually going to welcome into the full life of the church anyone, no matter who they love or how they identify.
All right, so I'd like to introduce my next guest. She went a step beyond inclusion with her church. She actually created a new church. Reverend Dawn Bennett is the founding pastor at The Table. Pastor Dawn, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. It's an honor.
So tell me, what makes your church so different?
So I'm ordained into the ELCA, which is the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and what centers The Table is that LGBTQ people are the core. Many churches, a lot of churches, say we are welcoming and affirming, we're open and affirming. And that means that LGBTQ plus people are invited into our sanctuary, into our pews, into our programming. We say at the table, we too are welcoming and affirming. We love all the straight folks to come. It's a complete paradigm shift. The table centers the lived experiences of LGBTQ plus people. So everything we do is from that lens forward. Yeah.
Tell me, how did it come to be? How was the table built, so to speak?
I was called by Bishop Kevin Strickland in the Southeastern Synod, a synod is the ELCA's way of talking about regions, right? That means region for us. And so the Southeastern Synod is Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. And so Bishop Strickland, about a decade ago, was actually a pastor here in Nashville. And so he understands the desperate cry of the queer community at the intersections of faith. Religion is cultural here in the Deep South. And so my call into ministry was to specifically answer that desperate cry of people, to help them journey back to a place of whole person wellness so that their faith could be a vibrant part of their lived experience.
Now, the timing of the opening was challenging. Is that right?
It absolutely was.
What were some of the obstacles you all were facing?
So we launched January of 2020, and we initially launched in a dinner church model. That was the intention. The liturgy would be dinner, cooking, eating, and that is fellowship and liturgy together. But then COVID came less than 60 days, and so that made dinner impossible. And so I, like every other pastor, had to pivot to a virtual experience. And prior to that pivot, we had just enough people involved to let me know when they would want to meet, what day of the week and what time of the day. And so the focus would have been between 5 and 7 p.m. on Sunday evenings. And so when I made the pivot, I just started preaching from my home, which became my pulpit, like every other pastor in the United States, right? Or in the world, really. And so I began preaching at 7 p.m. on Sundays, and it stuck. And we're now a couple years in, and we've got 1,500 people a week that tune in, so I can't go back from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, if you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekalona. We're talking this hour about the LGBTQ-affirming churches in our town with Pastor Dawn Bennett and worship leader Stephen Ader. Now, Pastor Dawn, I understand you identify as bisexual. Now, I'm curious, as you discovered you wanted to be a minister, did you feel like that path was open to you?
I was born into a practicing Catholic family, and I have 3 gay siblings. And so not only being a bisexual person, but also being a woman would not have availed me the opportunity to serve in leadership. And then in the late 80s, I transitioned to the Lutheran Church. And in 2009, the church made a big pivot where they began ordaining openly LGBTQ people. And so since 2009, I have always had the opportunity to serve in leadership. So I think at that point, I always knew I was called to ministry. I was raising a family at that time. And my father, who gave me some wise words, told me not to overlook the fact that raising a family is ministry in and of itself. And so now here I am many years later, and I'm single. My kids are grown. And so a couple years ago, the path opened up again for ordained ministry.
Now, you were telling us about your church, the table, and its origins. What's worship like right now at the table? So there is a liturgy. It is somewhat different than what a traditional sanctuary would offer. A lot of the liturgical elements that have meaning, like I don't often wear my clerics because a lot of people don't understand what they mean. And when I'm dressed like a priest, that can be very triggering for people in the queer community because many of us have been harmed by people who are dressed like priests. And so I usually wear street clothes. I do wear a stole. That is a liturgical vestment. But worship does include musical elements. We do read scripture from
biblical teaching and other things. I do preach. I'm what we call a lectionary preacher, and I do that very deliberately so that traditional churches preach a lectionary, which is a set of readings, and everybody in the country follows this pattern of readings. And so I deliberately preach the lectionary reading so that LGBTQ people get a life-giving message based upon the same piece of scripture that everybody else in the country has heard. And it just becomes very much a tool and very much a way. Liturgy at the table is rooted in what we call the 3 R's, which is reframing, reforming, and reclaiming. We reframe Scripture so that we can find ourselves located in the narrative of the biblical teachings, and then we reform new healthy patterns about how that could be a life-giving teaching for our lives and our lived experiences as LGBTQ plus people. And then finally, we go to task of deliberately reclaiming our faith, and we publicly profess that we are loved by God, always loved by God.
I understand what you're saying. It's kind of more so than you embracing the faith. It's having the faith embrace you.
Yeah, it becomes a very reciprocal, deliberately reciprocal relationship.
Mm-hmm. Now, Stephen, you mentioned growing up in the church. Did you ever consider leaving before it became so intentional about inclusion?
I didn't. I was lucky that I grew up at Glendale and not in many of other churches that preach. I went to another local church here in middle school. I won't name drop, but that was the most homophobic sermon I had ever heard, and it was on a Wednesday night in a larger church, and it was not United Methodist. I'll put that one there. I'd never heard those words from the pulpit at Glendale ever. And looking back, although, the older generation might have leaned a tad bit more conservative back then, it was always loving and always welcoming. I think we just needed to up a notch or a lot of notches to make sure that no matter where you've come from, that you do feel like you're welcome and affirmed and loved by God and by each other just as you are.
What was your reaction when you were in middle school on that Wednesday night and you heard that extremely homophobic sermon?
It was jaw-dropping. I still pass by that church sometimes, and when I'm over on that side of town, and I just, it's still triggering, and I think that, that's a very minor issue compared to, what most of our LGBTQIA plus community have faced in the church, where they've been excluded, pushed out, physically shoved out. I mean, there's so many, the stories that we've heard from people that have come to find Glendale to be their church home have been awful. Like, it is so sad. The church is its own defeat. And we wonder why people in droves of any gender identity, any sexuality, straight, gay, any, that run away from the church because of so many reasons, and we wonder why.
So when these people run away from this church, but yet they come to you all, what have they said to you about being accepted, about being embraced?
Yeah, I think that the welcome message that I shared earlier, that we share in every worship service, I think those words have been so important in the new life that we've seen, because we've had people, even a teen that had grew up in another more conservative denomination, their family started coming, and they now identify as non-binary. They shared that coming to Glendale as a teenager was the first time that they felt that they were actually loved by God for who they were. Those words, and that's just one story of many that we've heard, but it's people who have been kicked out, excluded for various reasons that I think it's authenticity. I think our churches, they either force inclusion or they force being something that they're not really, or they think that that's how they're going to grow or get new people in the door. I think that one of our strengths is, I think because it happened also naturally, that it's just the authentic presence of love amongst the people. We don't do church like we've always done it. There's none of that like holding us back. And if we need to maneuver, switch, move, change, that's available to us at Glendale. And I do the announcements every Sunday at the end of the service. And from time to time, I share that Glendale is what it is today because of each person that is part of the community right now. We do missions because of what people are passionate about. We do worship because of how people are passionate. The music, the songs, the sermons, our pastor's sermons. Like, she reaches to talk about something relevant. She's short and to the point, which I love, but she gets to, she's hitting it. And you might be uncomfortable with some of the sermons, if your theology might be a little bit different, or your political leanings might be some way. But I think that she is relevant in creating a space that provides safety to all people that walk through the door.
Now, Pastor Dawn, you mentioned people experiencing harm from their church leaders in the past. What do your members have to say to you about finding the table?
Most of the time, I am met with tears and a little bit of disbelief and a whole lot of trepidation. There is so much harm. I have had people tell me their stories of how they physically have been thrown out of churches, like hands on your body and removed from a building. I can't fathom that. Even being raised in Catholic tradition, I don't know where I'd be if I didn't have those early teachings, and I wasn't out then. I was just a child. But at the same time, a lot of folks that come to the table come because they have seen us online. They have heard some interview that I've done, and they come because they want to see if I'm real, that there's actually a pastor who's openly bisexual and ordained and gives communion and preaches the Bible and says, God is happy with you just as you are. God loves you in all of your fullness. So there's a lot of disbelief, and it can be a very slow, tender roll. One of the things I appreciate most about Glendale is that they have managed to strike the balance between tradition and innovation and future thinking, right? And so there are churches that can tote that balance of the line. The table, because it's intentionally queer-centric, our beginnings tend to be a little bit more humble because the population that we're dealing with is not used to being affirmed. They're not used to being, accepted, and so it takes a while for them to lean into this and build comfort and safety and flex those muscles instead of the reverse of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Consistently waiting for that shoe to drop, you're living in fear. And so it takes a minute to make that turn of, leaning into it just could be different this time.
Now, we're talking about this shift in churches with the table and Glendale. What do you all think is behind this shift in church culture and our churches right now? Pastor Dawn?
Oh, I get this question a lot, and the best that I can tell, by and large, as Americans and as citizens, as humans, other humans, we are becoming less tolerant of racism, bigotry, homophobia, and just things that tear apart families. And I think that when folks realize that the church is really a hospital, it's not a place where you are all cleaned up and ready to go. A church is filled with broken people who want to be loved, who want to be cared for, who want to be accepted as they are. And I think that churches like the table, like Glendale, like other affirming churches, welcoming churches, they have realized that people need to be cared for as they are. They don't need to be changed. And so it's the church's role to be the shapeshifter. It's the church's role. We have the church, big C. The church is responsible for a great amount of harm, and it's up to the church to make the necessary changes to repair that breach.
Now, Stephen, same question to you. What do you think is behind it? And also, why is it important that church and church cultures in our town are changing in this way?
I think the woman from Texas that has lashed out about Hocus Pocus 2 is a great example of the church being irrelevant. And I think as society evolves and progresses in the right way and opens its mind generation by generation, I think that teachings of you're excluded or this is evil if you watch this or whatever. I saw that story yesterday and thought it was just judgmental of you can't watch this because evil's going to come to your children. So like those sort of teachings that, might have been mainstream back when, I think that people are revolting against that or running away from that. And, as United Methodists, if we believe that God's grace is available to all people no matter what, then that doesn't mean excluding anybody for any reason. And that obviously includes God's love. It's great to see more and more churches get on board with being affirming and inclusive and just opening those doors. It's a slow process for so many of our churches, though. I'm glad that for us it was easy. For the table, it was natural, and that was how it was formed. And I love Bishop Strickland, and I'm so glad that he launched it and called you for that, Pastor Don. It's more important. I think. History will tell, that as we continue to see more and more churches kind of get on board and really open the doors wider to all people, we'll see which churches continue to grow, continue to thrive, because I am hopeful and prayerful that it is the churches that include all people no matter what, and the ones that exclude have a lesson to hopefully be learning.
Pastor Don, what does it mean for the religious culture in Nashville?
I think that the culture is changing. People have been under this false idea that the church is dying. The church is not dying. It will never die. Every 500 years, there's a shift and a schism that causes things to break apart. And in order for things to come to life, other things have to die. And I think in this part of the country, what is dying off is this idea that white supremacy and Christian nationalism is okay. It is absolutely not. I believe that ideas like racism and homophobia that have been perpetuated by public officials and by conservative doctrine is okay. It is not okay. And I believe that the narrative, people are beginning to stand up, and the church is changing for the better. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be painless. But by God's great grace, we'll all get there.
That is Reverend Dawn Bennett, pastor at the table. She was joined by Stephen Ader of the Glendale United Methodist Church. Stephen, Pastor Dawn, thanks you both for being here. Really appreciate this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
We have to take a short break. When we come back, we'll hear some firsthand accounts of being an LGBTQ person of faith in our city. Are you a part of a queer affirming church? Tweet us at This Is Nashville. We'll be right back. I'm Khalil Ekalona, and this is Nashville. Today, we've been talking about churches in our town that are evolving to welcome and empower LGBTQ members. Now, I'd like to bring in a few members of those faith communities to talk about their experience, both inside and outside of the church. Eric Patton is an ordained minister who specializes in weddings for LGBTQ couples, and Kashif Andrew Graham is outreach librarian of religion and theology at Vanderbilt Divinity Library. Eric, Kashif, welcome to This Is Nashville.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Really happy to have you both here. So, Eric, let's start with you. I understand that you grew up in the church. Tell me what it was like for you.
Oh, goodness. So I was very involved in my church growing up. So I grew up in rural Tennessee in Fentress County and went to this little country church. They were sweet, but it was watching Fox News Sunday whenever you went and heard a sermon, usually. Mm-hmm. It was a lot more cultural to go to church. And it was not great for a young queer person hearing. I remember one of the deacons drove me to church one Sunday and said something along the lines of, it's a choice and they're all going to hell.
Whoa, okay.
And I was probably about, 13 or 14 when that was said to me, so it was just ingrained to me. And at that point, I was very much in the closet. I knew very young that I was some brand of different. I didn't really have words to put into it because it just wasn't around. We're in a small town. So it was kind of traumatic, and it realized I was going to have to hide for a while or pray to fix it. And that's exactly what I did. I would lay in my bed and pray the Lord, let this cup pass from me prayer. And I know that that was the words I had at the time, because I didn't want to disappoint anybody. I wanted to make a difference, and I wanted to have this life where I could be in the church, because I was very, I believe in Jesus. I believe that we have a Savior who loves us. And I think it was really hard for me to reconcile that until I went to Washington, D.C. I got the opportunity to page on the House floor. I'm also very into politics. I'm super fun to have at a dinner party.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I went to that same church Stephen was just talking about, the Capitol Hill United Methodist. I was there for one Sunday. They preached nothing like I'd ever heard before. They had a note in their bulletin that they welcomed members of their community, all members of their community, no matter their sexual orientation or gender identity, and blew my mind because, I lived in that town, and although there were probably 100 churches serving 16,000 people in that county, I had never, ever heard a message that queer people can be Christian. It blew my mind.
So when you hear that message for the first time and you have this, sorry for the pun, revelation.
Sure.
What was your feelings? How did that kind of either restore or bring fire back to your faith?
It allowed me to know that I'm not alone. And I think that is what we're all searching for in this life, is to know that we're not the only ones going through this. And, I went back and talked to my youth pastor, and I didn't say anything that day. I pretended like it didn't affect me. And I was just like, what is this? Okay. And I went back home, talked to my youth pastor, and I was like, what is this? They're a queer Christian? There are gay Christians? That's a thing? And he said, well, Eric, some people believe that. And that's all the permission I needed. I started researching, and I looked more into the Reconciling Ministries Network, and it saved my life.
All right. Now, Kashif, tell me, what was your religious upbringing like?
So I grew up Caribbean Pentecostal, Church of God. In fact, I was so Church of God that when I was going to seminary in Cleveland, Tennessee, and my parents came down to visit with me, my mother was standing outside of the Church of God publishing house and almost kissed the ground. Wow. Because she had been seeing books and hymns and things like that stamped with the Church of God Pathway Press from the time that she was growing up in Jamaica. So the Church of God has been, sort of runs in my blood, if you will. And that was the tradition that I grew up in.
Now, you had an idea of the path you wanted to take in life, where you wanted to go to Bible college. And I can imagine what you just said. Your family supported that decision.
Fully. And in fact, there was definitely an encouragement from my family to become a children's pastor. And I had to walk through my own journey of realizing that I wanted to go to seminary because I had wanted to be a good father. And I was convinced that if I went to seminary and unpacked the scriptures, close reading, verse by verse and in order, so to speak, that I would eventually get the tools to become straight and to be masculine, if you will. And when I was in seminary, it was where I had my deconstruction period.
What was that process like?
It was difficult. I mean, I think within the first semester, when I remember one of my Old Testament professors talking about the variant manuscripts of the Old Testament books. And I thought, wait a minute. So y'all don't know either. I thought I was going to go to seminary and get all of the answers. And I think within that first semester, things started to fall apart. And it wasn't until I was in the middle of my journey and I was taking a class called Human Growth and Transformation And the readings that we were doing, Birth of the Living God, Anna Maria Rizzuto, and some of these other texts really encouraged me to look at my image and ideas about God. And of course, I was also, while I was in seminary, I was working in libraries, and I had access to thousands of titles. And so, like Eric, I started reading, researching, Nick White's How to Survive a Summer, Boy Erased, by Garrett Conley, God and the Gay Christian, Torn. There's so many other texts. And I started to read James Baldwin, Go Tell It on the Mountain. All of those books attended me, really, on my coming out and deconstruction journey.
Now, my next guest has taken a unique path to the ministry. Lóre Stevens is an intern minister at First Universalist Church of Minneapolis. Lóre, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Khalil.
So, you grew up in the church like Eric and Kashif, but I understand you decided to stop going at a young age. Tell me, why did you make that choice?
Oh, yeah. Really young, I was so over wearing the dresses and the tights and the girly clothes. Like, going to church was very gendered, and really young, I didn't like that.
So how did your parents react when you told them, you're not doing this anymore?
Luckily, they weren't very devout either, and they were kind of okay with me backing away. And then when I became a teenager and the internet was starting to become more of a thing, I started having these conversations online about doubt and about how the church had really hurt a lot of people. And I realized I'm an atheist.
Okay, so you're an atheist, but you found a church here in Nashville, the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Nashville. How did you come to find that church?
I had had this wild spiritual experience when I was 25, completely out of nowhere, because I'm an atheist. I wasn't looking for that kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. But one night I just completely sober and out of nowhere realized that all the particles of my being, that I was one with everything else. And because I'm an atheist, I needed some community. I needed some people to talk about that with. And I wandered into this church because it's more than a church. It's an interfaith congregation where I could ask questions about Buddhism and paganism and being an atheist, being Christian, being Jewish. I could ask questions and try to find the right answer for me.
Now, how did attending a welcoming congregation, how did that influence your journey from this experience that you had?
Well, the thing about Unitarian Universalist congregations is they're more than welcoming. They're deeply queer. UU churches have had openly gay ministers since 1980. But this blew my mind because I didn't know that. And I thought all churches were going to hurt me. We're going to be, I'm bisexual. They were going to judge me, kick me out, that kind of thing. But after the Pulse nightclub shooting happened back in 2016, I saw the minister at the UU congregation in Nashville at the vigil. And I was so grateful. I was like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. I had no idea that religious professionals would come to such a thing. Although I'm sure some of your guests, Dawn, for example, I bet that they were there too. But for me, I had no idea. And I was so grateful. And for my minister, she was like, of course I'm here. Of course I'm here. It was completely normal for her. And that changed my understanding of what religion could be.
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekolona. We're talking this hour about LGBTQ-affirming churches and what it's like to be a queer believer in Nashville with Eric Patton, Kashif Graham, and Lóre Stevens. Now, you're talking about your personal journeys as faith and faith as queer believers. And, I got to ask this question. Eric, you have a church home, but you also perform marriages for LGBTQ couples. What does that mean to you, to be able to do that work?
Sure. So I go to Belmont United Methodist. It's over in Hillsborough Village. Shout out to Pastor Paul and everyone listening. But the Methodist Church doesn't currently ordain LGBTQ people. And while that's a problem, we're working on it at Belmont. We are very fiercely supportive of the LGBTQ community and are working within the denomination to change things, along with Glendale and several other reconciling ministries here in Nashville. I wasn't interested in getting ordained in the Methodist Church because there are a lot of rules. And I think a lot of times we worry about so many things like rules, and it gets in the way of loving our neighbor. And I was so adamant about, when they passed the law in, I think it was 2019, that said you had to be ordained in person, where they got rid of the online ordinations in Tennessee, I went as a protest to go get my ordination in person. And I posted on Facebook and never intended to use it, and got 3 requests that day. And I'm now right around 200 weddings since 2019.
Now, what about now? I mean, the fallout with the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision has opened the door to eliminate, people are worried that it opens the door to eliminate marriage equality laws. Are you seeing more people getting married? Are you getting more requests after that?
So I'll marry anyone as long as you love each other. I think that's what's important. I'm actually headed to one after this.
Okay.
But I've got to go all the way to Cumberland Furnace. So I'll be listening to NPR on my way there. But no, I back in May when the decision was leaked, I definitely got an increase in requests, and I had some folks who had booked me for later in the year go ahead and do the paperwork now. So when we started seeing the leak, and then when it finally came down that, okay, this is happening with the Dobbs decision, I did see a bump. It's starting to decrease a little more now. I think with what we're hearing from Tammy Baldwin in the Senate, that the Respect for Marriage Act will pass after the election to give some cover to some scared senators. Hopefully we'll be able to pass it then. But at the same time, it was a busy summer. It definitely was. I had, normally I have 1 or 2 a month, and I was seeing 3 and 4, 5 and 6.
Yeah.
I think I did 6 in June and 8 in July.
All right.
So
we'll see how the politics plays out. Now, Kashif, tell me, what's your relationship to the church like now?
So I kind of call myself an all paths to love or to the universe kind of person. I don't attend church anymore. And to be quite frank, I'm not sure that I necessarily believe in a God. But I do believe in goodness with a capital G and creativity with a capital C. And I'm more concerned with how we treat each other now, than perhaps an afterlife. And this is not novel. There's something called Black Power theology, which says, let's not worry about the eschaton, so to speak. Let's not worry about, the second coming of Christ and the afterlife. Let's worry about the right now. Give me the house and land and the power now. Give me love and wonder, all the wonderful things that life could be now. And I think that's what I'm more concerned with. However, as a divinity librarian working in a divinity school that's led by Black queer women, I feel like I'm in church all the time. Mm-hmm. Every time I go into my office with my coworkers, I feel like I'm in church. And so that's giving me everything that I need. I have wonderful friends, a wonderful family, and our interactions all feel spiritual to me. So my relationship with the church is, I know a lot of people in many queer-affirming congregations in town, but I do not belong narrowly to any of them.
Now, something that's interesting to me is that all 3 of you have had these very unique paths in really strengthening your faith. It's been to the point where you felt like you didn't belong. You were having a crisis of conscience, so to speak. And you found this faith through these absolute miracles that have happened for you all. I'm interested, Lóre, what does that mean to you? And what can church culture gain when it evolves and becomes more inclusive to embrace people who may have paths that are similar to yours?
So what it means to me is that Unitarian Universalism is a mouthful, but basically what it means is one and all. And that's what we're about. Everyone is welcome in all our particularity and in our connection with everybody else. We believe in a love that is completely universal. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, so I can fit too. I can be this too. And I ended up going to Harvard Divinity School, because not only do people my age, these younger generations coming up, we have a hunger for spirituality, but so many of us are queer that we feel like we can't be in religions. But these religious traditions also have a hunger for us. And there's a beautiful mutual growth that's happening. Dawn and Stephen were talking about it earlier. And we're just moving right on into a beautiful, love-filled future.
It's wonderful. I want to thank all of you for coming on to the show, sharing your journeys, and being here for this episode. Really appreciate it. Our guests were ordained minister Eric Patton. He was joined by Kashif Graham, librarian of religion and theology at Vanderbilt, and intern minister Lóre Stevens. Again, thank you all for being here today. We want to thank everyone who tuned in this hour. Tomorrow, it's the perfect time to get out for a hike. With plenty of places to go, we'll talk with members of the hiking community about the joy of the trail. This is Nashville is a production of WPLN News and Nashville Public Radio. Listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Our producers are Steve Harush, Rose Gilbert. Our digital lead is Anna Gallegos Cannon. Michaela Elias is our technical director. Our executive producer is Andrea Tudhope. Shout out to our intern, Tori Hoover. The masterminds behind our theme music are Laurent and Namir Blade. And special thanks to Elizabeth Madera. The conversation doesn't end here. Tweet us at This Is Nashville. Find us on Instagram and tell us what you want from our show by filling out our quick survey online. This is Nashville. I am Khalil A. Colonna. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody. And be good to each other.